Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. I'm your host, Ryan Singer. I am joined once again today by Abigail Moss. You may know her from Mind Body Free, which is also the name of the website. We can talk about the mentorship program too later to make sure we, let people know that that's available. But we talked about ayahuasca and trying to understand the relationship between human beings and Mother Nature, and in fact, that it's really not that separate. And the interesting thing, I think, from the last conversation was that Earth actually does care. Like Mother Nature does care what we do, that we hang around. Because I was curious, I was like, maybe she's ambivalent about it and doesn't really like, hey, you're going to destroy yourselves. I'm still going to be here. But you described it in a way that it was like, much like your child. You don't want your child to, come to harm caused by itself. You definitely want what's best for your offspring, so to speak. So, which was pretty cool. So I recommend people going back and checking that out if they haven't heard that one yet. I believe it was 329. So, but today we got some fun stuff to talk about. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back on. Yeah, that was a fun conversation we had last time.
Yeah, it sure was. And a lot has changed since that last conversation.
Mhm.
Um, and I know, I mean, for me, I'm like in a whole new, I live in a whole different place, and everything's changed for me. And
Ditto.
uh, but there's, we were talking about, I was on your podcast just the other day,
Yep.
um, and at the very after we got done recording, you mentioned, oh, I'd love to talk about tips for protection when doing paranormal investigations. And I was like, oh my God, well, it's a good thing we're recording in a couple days because we can get right into that. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what that means in from your perspective.
Yeah, 100%. So if you don't mind me sharing kind of the context where that came up, you mentioned you went into a place where you were doing paranormal investigation and it ended up being a really difficult experience that you're dealing with for some time after. Um, and so protection, what does that mean? I feel like it's a number of things, and it depends a bit on what you're dealing with and what you're going into, because the paranormal world is not that unlike the physical world in that you're going to encounter all kinds of different beings, and some are going to be more friendly and some are going to be less friendly. But I kind of see it as number one, don't let them boss you around because you're the one in this physical world, not them. So you have a body, so you're always more powerful than them. Period. Um, and then if there's something that feels scary, it's the fear itself that is the threat. Because the fear takes you into the frequency, into the dimension of more negative energies. Um, and so it's realizing that those beings don't have any power over you. They only have as much power over you as you agree to them having over you. But before I get too deep into all of the ways you can do that, I think what protection means is it's about protecting your own boundaries, your own space, your energy, your spirit while you're in that contact with a paranormal energy or space or, something from the other side, the world of spirit, while you're there as well as after, because sometimes energy can hang out and kind of come with you and continue causing problems and nightmares and, just causing a ruckus. So it's protecting your energy before, while you're there, and after you're there to really make sure that you're kind of practicing really good kind of energetic boundaries and spiritual hygiene. It makes sure nothing gets mixed up there.
Yeah, I like the way that sounds. The Yeah, because I mean, especially when doing shamanic work, I mean, you're contacting the other side constantly. I mean, so although it's not the exact same thing as maybe doing a paranormal investigation, like going into a haunted school or going out into the woods to look for, cryptids who, I do believe have telepathic communications, but, or at least the ability to do so. But it is still in that same world of making contact, establishing contact, having an open line, having a communication, an interaction with something that is not necessarily, what we consider to be the physical world right in front of us, the 3D world that we kind of operate inside. So there's really not a big difference between the I guess the I guess the interaction that's happening to a certain degree when, although I mean, I guess you could say during a paranormal investigation you're kind of showing up for the most part kind of unannounced, like an unannounced house guest being like, hey, can we come hang out in your house and maybe
There's
cook us
that
dinner.
too.
But
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
is
Good
interesting
to
to
good to
think.
knock.
Yeah. So, I mean, so it does sound like you're a perfect person to talk about the idea of, keeping those boundaries, um,
Yeah.
not having the
Yeah.
residual effects.
I've had to deal a lot with establishing my own boundaries. When I started this work, I remember I was traveling, I was attending one of my shamanic Chinese medicine seminars, and it was nighttime. I was sleeping on the floor. We're all kind of like in this home, this Airbnb. And I heard the door creak open. I just said, I was about to fall asleep. And then something just jumped into my body. And it was just this feeling of paralyzing terror of maybe the energy of whatever jumped in mixing with my shock of what was going on. And it was like that for a few seconds, and then it jumped out and it was gone. And I was just, what WTF? What I don't know if I could swear here, but what was that? And it was really uncomfortable and really unpleasant. And I decided then and there, I don't want that to happen to me again. And I'm going to have to establish some ground rules with my body as I'm doing this kind of work. And I've encountered a lot of spaces. I've done lots of house clearings, people's homes and my own home. And, just kind of spontaneously things come up. Like when I'm working with, I had a couple of mentor students I was working with in Florida. They said, hey, are you sensing anything in the house? And I just did a scan. I'm like, yeah, there's somebody behind you calling themselves the Dark Overlord. I'd love to get more into it in a bit because it's a really interesting story on how to deal with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I really had to learn a lot about protecting my own physical space and basically claiming that as saying, this is my energetic boundary. You shall not pass on. By no means is that acceptable. And then also just not taking any energy too seriously, especially with the quote unquote dark overlord. When he said
That does
that,
sound like there's some tongue in cheek happening there.
right, it's kind of funny. Like as a comedian, you get how laughter lightens things, and so whenever I encounter beings like that, I just start laughing. I'm like, really, you're taking yourselves really seriously right now. And it begins to lighten things. Um, and I don't know if can I tell you a story about the Dark Overlord? Is
Of
that
course,
okay?
I'd love to hear a story about the Dark Overlord. I mean, that sounds
Okay.
like, to me, it's like some, teenager who was like super into Dungeons and Dragons, or Magic the Gathering or something like that, role playing games. Maybe had a tragic end before their time, and now they're just kind of stuck in this place, and they still call themselves the Dark Over. Like that's like
That's
I'm,
it.
I'll be interested to hear what the actual truth is here.
Yeah, that's an interesting guess at that. Yeah, so when I was connecting with it, I worked with lots of kind of darker beings, and in the early days it did scare me. I'm going to be 100% honest, like, oh my god, like I feel like there's something in my end of my bed and I'm trying to go to sleep. Because I was doing a lot of mediumship work and a lot of ghosts would come in at that time, and so for that I ended up having to establish some ground rules. So if ghosts appear, look, you have to see me at, this time on Thursdays, come between 2 and 4, not when I'm trying to sleep in the middle of the night. But yeah, so getting into the Dark Overlord story, when we found him there, and we just kind of did it together. So a lot of stuff will come up in the mentor classes, and we just kind of, all right, this is a great learning opportunity. So we kind of worked on clearing it together. And so I asked it, okay, what is your name? So, and visually, kind of the visual that I got of it, because I kind of sense, I feel my body. I kind of get a visual kind of through my third eye, like with my eyes closed, I can see it more easily. And then I will hear responses. So that's how I perceive things. So I got this visual of kind of this robed being in this white robe with its hood up and kind of head down, and may have been holding some sort of staff or something. But the dark overlord, I asked it, okay, well, what are you doing here? And it was something about causing suffering, which is not uncommon for darker beings. And I said, well, why are you causing suffering? And a lot of these energies, they're just energies that are also that they're just stuck in a pattern or stuck in a contract, not unlike people. So we get stuck in these ruts and these cycles of like, I'm doing this, I'm just doing my job. My job might be doing evil stuff, but it's my job. I forget how I even got started. This is what I do now. So a lot of these energies I find, which are darker, are like that. And so I asked it, why are you doing this job? And it said, I have a contract. And so this being had a contract with I feel like I'm kind of getting a little bit in the weeds here, but bear with me. He had a contract with this larger demon. And so I do this thing called clearing statements, where I just say uncreate and delete everything this is. So it's basically just saying we're going to clear this away, and we're just going to use a verbal command to uncreate that and delete it and destory it. And in doing that, kind of realizing, oh, it was just a story to begin with, and it's something that we can clear whatever we want. We don't have to attach to anything. So I do a lot of that with these darker beings. And so I was saying to it, uncreate, delete, destory everywhere you have to cause suffering, uncreate, delete everywhere you have a contract with another dark being. And this other dark being showed up, and this is the demon being. And so I started getting a little nervous at that point. And it started saying, look, you can't tear up a contract. That's my soul. You can't do that. And I was like, uncreate, delete, destroy everywhere. That's your soul. It didn't really have a response to that.
Oh, it's
and
like,
so
they didn't know what they walked into.
No. And I mean, I feel like you could just but do it with lightness, do it with respect. But I just kept clearing and clearing, and eventually helped that being, the dark overlord, to go into the light. And that demon guy kind of threw up the papers, the contract, in the air and stormed off kind of angrily. And I thought it was all done until the next day when oh no, that's what it was. Sorry, the big demon guy, he was there, and he's like, look, you owe me a soul. You better deal with this. You just gave up my soul. And they said, no, I don't. I'm create and delete all that. I'm create, delete everywhere I owe you a soul. And then I spoke with it, and I said, well, what are you doing here? Why are you having all of these contracts? What's your purpose here? I don't remember exactly what it said, but we ended up doing a lot of clearing on it, helping the big demon to go into the light. Because at the end of the day, I feel we all just want to be happy. There's always darkness within the light and light within the darkness. And so I thought it was all done until the next day. It was the evening, and I was sitting there, and I just felt like, when you get that feeling like there's something behind you, like there's something I have to deal with, but I don't want to.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I saw this whole row of these dark overlords behind me. There was like a whole gang of them. And I thought, shit, what have I gotten myself into? And I asked them, why are you here? And they looked at me, and they're like, we want to be with the rest of them. Our boss is gone.
Like, we heard you had some secret sauce that you were passing out.
Yeah, like we want to be with our friends. And so I guided all of them up into the light. And so they all wanted to be with their boss, and now they're happy. And they all moved on. But I feel like, it's just, in my earlier years, I would have let that terrify me, and I would have just been something probably lingering in the back of my mind, not yet resolved. But I feel with stuff like that, you got to deal with it. Otherwise, it's kind of out there hovering somewhere near your field. Yeah. And so, but at the end of the day, we all just want to be happy.
Yeah, even the demons. Even
Even the
demons just want
demons.
to hang out with their friends at some point.
Exactly. Exactly. Right?
That is a nice way to think about it, and it disarms the fear
Yeah.
to a large degree that can be associated with such activity and experiences. And yeah, I mean, experiences come in all different shapes and sizes, but the sensation of fear is, there's a baseline for that is, consistent depending on that doesn't really change as much as the details of what caused that fear are, variables. But that's really cool though that, this, conversation with these people in Florida just turns into this like line of dark overlords trying to just, you know, essentially they want to go to Margaritaville, and like there's stuff.
They just didn't know it at first. They just thought they had to create a lot of suffering.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I think there's a great lesson there to be learned for all of us. Um, at times in our lives where, we get hell bent on like proving a point or being right or feeling like we got our just desserts. When it's just like, well, I mean, why is this story being told to myself that I have to believe this?
Exactly. And that's the kind of energy that flows around us and through us. And it's some people can get possessed by beliefs like that. And kind of these kinds of energies will often influence us through our beliefs. And so the more that I say, I'm right, I need to create war about being right, then those kinds of energies will feed off that. So having awareness and what we're believing in and what that feels like in our body is so important, because that's really the way that you shift and release kind of energy like that.
That's really cool. So, if someone is curious about, bringing up their protections and, establishing these boundaries for themselves when it comes to going on paranormal investigations, whether it's to a house, a theater, an outdoor location, things like that, is it just that easy, or are there specific
Yeah,
techniques you'd recommend?
there are specific techniques. So, number one, before you go into any situation like that, connect with the light. So, that's simply a matter of imagining, sensing, or feeling, intending that light is going to pour down into you from above, from your head all the way down to your toe. Ground into the earth. So imagine tree roots coming from you, going all the way into the center of the earth, connecting you in there. And imagine light coming back up from the earth into the center of your chest and radiating out, filling your whole body and the space around you. And so when you connect with the light, um, that is cleansing your energy. So it's cleansing you of fears and stuck energy. So there's no magnets being attracted to that. And it's also supporting you. So you're connecting with this kind of universal energy of light. And light in itself is a very protective energy from dark energy. And so, number one is that. And then you want to set an invocation. So ask for protection. So if you work with spirit guides or angels or beings of light, you can just cover your bases and say all of the above, and just ask that you create a safe and sacred space for the work that you do, and that whatever you'd like to include in there, that it be for the highest good of all, that it be respectful of all beings, but always ask for protection and always connect with the light. So I do that before I work with any person, and I beginning of all of my mentor classes, and before I do any kind of shamanic work, I always do that. I like to light a candle as well, depending, on where I am. If I'm not being mobile too much, it's in one place. So that's kind of like a physical signifier of like, hey, I'm connecting with spirit and I'm doing it in a sacred way.
I don't know if I've ever met anyone who doesn't enjoy a nice candle.
Yeah.
The I mean, there's never a situation where a candle doesn't seem right for me. I mean, outside of being like in the woods during like a very dry season and or something like that, right? I'm not thinking about that, but summer, winter, fall, spring, it doesn't, nighttime, daytime, a candle seems to just always hit the spot. I'm
Yeah.
definitely a candle guy, 100%. The Do you have like a go-to candle?
I just light tea candles and I have it in this amethyst crystal candle holder. But any kind will work for me. My teacher used to always light them before every class, and I thought it was really beautiful. And she was really intent about making sure that stay lit. And so, and when I was doing ayahuasca, there was always a candle at the center of the room during ceremonies. And so feels like the physical anchor to our connection with spirit.
Well, I really, I really like the visualization of the candle being that anchor and that, like, that connection. Now, if, let's say, someone who's, doesn't have shamanic training like yourself, they go into a situation and they realize, okay, there's something not enjoyable happening here, or they're feeling threatened. Is there, outside of like removing themselves from the physical space where they are, we all know that that's just not enough when it comes to, passengers, or if things want to try to attach to us, so on and so forth. Is there a, cord cutting, a clearing, or something that someone can travel, like almost like a paranormal first aid kit?
Oh, for me, that's an interesting question. A paranormal first aid kit. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely ways you can do clearing. It really depends on what the energy is that you connected with. So some energies you might want some support to go into the deeper layers of, okay, what's going on here? Let's fully clear this from your field. In other cases, you might just need to cleanse your own energy. So, and even saying with your intention. So again, before you try to do any clearing, connect with the light, ground into the earth, ask for the help of your guides, your guardians, and your angels to help you. And you can ask them to help you clear it. And you could say, any attachments that I have to this or any attachments this has to me, I uncreate and delete all of them and I send it all up into the light. And you just keep repeating that again and again and again. So I just uncreate, delete, 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 delete everywhere it's been following me, delete all the reasons it's been following me, delete everywhere it's tied to my field. I send it into the light, delete everywhere it needs to continue bothering me, uncreate, delete everything that is from all timelines, space, and realities, and send that into the light. And so that's what I would do. Yeah.
Uncreate, delete. There is, and what was the other one? D-story?
Yeah. So like take the story out of it. Yeah. I originally heard that from Christy Marie Sheldon and I quite liked it. And I use it a lot now in my classes and then for my own healing. It's something that like when I started healing my body, I had to really have a massive lifestyle and diet change. And it was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done. So I had to end up sitting on the floor for 10 minutes one time and saying, I uncreate, delete, undo story, all attachments to my oatmeal for breakfast.
Oh, wait,
So
wait, 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 wait. We got to call a television timeout because, wait, we can't be doing oatmeal for breakfast?
I know, right? Like the world was ending. I was like
I
sitting on my
thought this
kitchen
was like
floor
the
with my
best
head
way
in
to
my
lower your
hands.
cholesterol.
Oh,
And
you can. It's I had something called candida overgrowth, and so I needed to cut all sugars and carbs so that nothing like I had like extremely low sugar kind of keto diet for like still doing it, but it was an extreme necessity for me. Most
oh, okay.
people oatmeal for breakfast is just fine.
Okay, so you weren't like referencing oatmeal as like almost like someone going to McDonald's for
No,
lunch every
oatmeal
day.
is your friend.
Okay.
It was my friend for a long time.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had to part ways with the meal of oat, but
In hindsight
um
is nothing.
yeah, right? I mean, it's like when you were a kid you couldn't be forced to eat oatmeal. It seemed, at least in my world, like if like my mom or dad or somebody tried to get me to eat oatmeal when I was a kid, or like my grandparents, I would be like, I would rather die than eat oatmeal. Like, to me, it was like, this is, and then you get a little bit older and you realize, oh, I can just put as much sugar and
Maple
cinnamon and
syrup and
whatever else
honey.
into this oatmeal
Mhm.
that I want. And then it's not even oatmeal anymore. It might as well just be cinnamon toast crunch. But um, okay, moving on from the oatmeal. The Well, I think this kind of ties into some of the things we did want to talk about as well, because I mean, part of me wants to ask you, okay, like what's the worst attachment you've ever had, and things like that. But
I want to
you
ask
may,
you that too.
well, I can't be 100% sure about that. Um, but I definitely feel like there are certain things that have, attempted to attach themselves to me 100%. And there's, it's almost like a somewhat regular regiment to ensure that that does not happen, and or to let it drain me, or to try to suck me dry from whatever it's trying to feed off of. And that's definitely something that has happened. um Now, it's weird because I've never thought of it this way, but I'm thinking of it now after our conversation about like fear as being its own kind of attachment. And there's
Greatest one.
definitely different ways that fear has tried to attach itself to me, almost as if it's its own entity. Um, and I've let that get the better of me for sure in the past, and I've definitely taken steps to remedy that. But um, that's probably the biggest one, is the fear attachment.
Yeah. And you think about it, there's always an element of illusion when it comes to fear, situations like that. Unless you're actually running from a tiger, you're probably a lot safer than you think. And, I kind of think about working with energies that want to intimidate, as the scene from The Wizard of Oz, when they get to Oz and they go into the castle to see the wizard, and he has this big booming kind of hocus pocus face in front of the curtain and all scary, and then they throw the curtain back and there's just this tiny little guy running these little machines trying to look all big and scary. And I feel like a lot of darker energies, it can be fun, or help them to feel powerful by trying to intimidate someone else, by trying to say you should fear me, I'm going to do all of these things, or whatever it is saying, we don't know. But even if it's just a sensation of fear, that could be an intimidation tactic. But at the end of the day, you're the one in the physical body. You are the one who has power over your physical world. They aren't in physical form. So right there, you were way more powerful than they could influence you in this dimension. And number two, it's just they're only as powerful as you agree that they are. And so with the fear too, that fear is silently saying something. So that fear is silently saying you're not safe. And that's presupposing that you're not as powerful as you think you are in that moment. So it's just
Yeah,
remembering that you are.
I guess it is, fitting that the the anecdote or the cure or whatever we want to call it to fear is just realizing who you really are,
Yeah.
and who you have been the whole time. Um, and that's, it makes me wonder if people who never come to that understanding and kind of live this life of fear, and this is going to be sound pretty tragic actually, but now that I'm thinking it, and then after they're gone, if they don't get stuck in the cycle of that, and therefore kind of, because you hear the story a lot, and there's no accident that a lot of people who feel powerless, they kind of pass the buck. And so a lot of the people who bully, a lot of the people who hurt, are people who have found someone weaker than them, or at least who they perceive to be weaker than them, or who will accept, what they're dishing out. And it's just them filtering it from the source that is bullying them or taking it out on them or picking on them, as they are perceived to be the weaker thing that will take it. And so they're just kind of passing this pain from themselves to someone else to try to maybe feel powerful, to feel like I do
Right.
have control over this life and in this world, and I'll prove it to, so and so who abuses me or whatever, and I'll do it to someone else.
Exactly. And it's really good to have that awareness too, because it creates compassion right away. And when there's compassion, that kind of melts the fear away too. It just helps you to see that, oh, there's a part of you that's hurt that you're acting out from. This is causing you to be a bully in physical or non-physical form. It's the same kind of thing. And it's just there's something in that energy that's wounded and or confused that it's acting out from. And so, I kind of see it, all energies, situations like that, as an opportunity for healing. If it's showing up in my space, I'm not going to, lead a righteous charge and going and healing energies that don't want to be a part of that. That's fine. But if there's something in my space or one of my clients' spaces, then this is an opportunity for healing for everybody.
Yeah, I feel like the subtext between any time you see someone screaming on an airplane about not wanting to wear a mask, or someone screaming at a stoplight about someone else who cut them off, or any of these situations, the subtext should just be that person screaming, like letting everyone know, I need a hug. I need a hug. I need a
Right?
hug. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just like, but trying to remember that and trying to stay keyed in on that is a whole different, um,
Yeah.
because then we'll get upset. And when we're yelling at them, basically what we're just saying is, I need a hug too.
Right?
Like,
Exactly.
that's what
Yeah.
every argument boils down to. Um,
Yeah.
People who need hugs. The Yeah, I wonder if when it comes to like playing out these cycles and getting stuck in these stories that kind of just tell themselves over and over and over and over again, the so oftentimes when we're in the midst of it, when we're inside of the story, we can't see the story, right? So I wonder if there's any like really good way to just kind of try to understand the stories that we're living, without realizing it, for people.
Yeah. So I think from what I'm getting from what you're saying, is there a way to kind of step outside our own story to understand it from the perspective not entirely inside of it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we get perspective on the stories that we're living that we didn't realize?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I feel like there's ways we can do it for ourselves. Also, this is the beauty of, being a collaborative species. I feel like it's so helpful to get an outside perspective to see those blind spots and move through them. I regularly do that. I'll probably be working with healers and coaches for the rest of my life. I do. I've gotten so much value from that. But I think personally, there's a lot of ways of creating a sense of separation. Meditating is the beginning of doing that because it creates awareness, it cultivates more awareness. And in that awareness, you begin to create a space between you and the stories. And in that space, you realize that you aren't the stories. And in realizing that, you have the freedom to choose a different story. So that's a really powerful way of doing it. It might be a really frustrating answer for the mind to hear because the mind loves to make things complicated. What do you mean I have to sit and breathe? That sounds terrible, but it can be a really powerful way of creating space and cultivating the awareness to let go of those stories and simply being aware that they are stories to begin with. So using things like clearing statements, I uncreate, delete, and destory this. Just saying that is bringing an awareness to myself, is like, oh, this is something that I can let go of. This is something that actually is a story. And you think we go deep enough, everything that we perceive about reality is some kind of story. That's how our mind makes sense of it. And we have sensations and experiences, like we can experience love and connection, and that can feel much deeper than a story. But all the ways that we frame the world is a story. And that's a frame that we can change anytime. It just takes the will and some tools and practice and maybe support to do that.
Yeah, for sure. One of the big stories that's being told um, is that, you know, we've never been more divided as a people, at least here in the United States. That's like a big story. Everybody seems to be
Mm.
really leaning into just kind of believing it, um, and which I think is unfortunate. Um, but I think it speaks to like one of my big stories that I kind of live play out sometimes is the idea of doing things in a solitary fashion, or always being the one to make sure to do something, right? And or if you want something done, you have to do it yourself, etc. That whole kind of mantra. The fact that I'm like, hey, how can one take themselves out of a story and see it? But like you bring up such a great point of the collaboration aspect, um, and it's so important to, I guess, understand the value of other people, teachers, healers, people like yourself. I know I've had so much insight given to me as gifts from doing these things, and whether it's from a therapist, or a shaman, or even just friends who are intuitive or empathic. It's so valuable to rely on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think anyone does anything alone. I can't think of anything I've accomplished in life entirely by myself. And I don't really feel like we're meant to. And maybe some people thrive in that way, but I feel like ultimately we all rely on people for so many things, this home, this food, connecting, communicating, the currency of money. It's like, well, why wouldn't I invite my personal growth into a collaborative part of that too?
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever, like you said, not only are we not meant to do something alone, I don't think anyone has ever accomplished anything alone.
Yeah.
And, whether it's, simply being inspired by someone else when you were younger, and then later taking that inspiration without even having it at the forefront of your mind and running with that and creating your own things, that's still inspiration that came from someone else. And
Exactly.
yeah, so I'd
That,
be hard
that's
pressed to find any example of someone who has ever accomplished anything on their own.
Yeah, and I feel like you mentioned with inspiration, that's kind of how we grow and evolve as a species. I think back to the rock climbers who first started climbing Yosemite National Park, and it took them days and days, and they used all of this gear, and it was, difficult. And then the next generation used less gear, and they did it in half the time. And the next generation did it in a quarter of the time, and didn't use any gear. And but the ones who paved the way before that opened up the door for those people to come. And so I feel like we're always gathering inspiration and interpreting things and sharing and collaborating in this shared space for that just kind of we all benefit from.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it, because we learn just as much from the people who came before us and the mistakes they made than we do from the innovations they made. And,
Yeah,
I think that's for sure the case in stand up comedy. And, stand up comedy has an opportunity to be whatever it wants to be, um, as a whole. I mean, and that whole is comprised of, seemingly millions of individuals. But, that's collectively we get to choose that for ourselves, and therefore shape the community. And so I think that's it, kind of the same way for everything else, um, as well. And to dismiss the mistakes um, that people before us in any field have made that we've been able to learn from would be, we can't forget those, because what do they say, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, which I think is very, very true, and very accurate. But it's so funny too, like, because you never think, like, you see these things from the past and you'll be like, oh, we'd never do that. and then cut to 30, 40 years later, and it's just seemingly a bunch of people doing that again. And is that this like story being told again, but in a different way? Like, is there, I mean, I guess we could look at stories on a macro and a micro level, right?
100%. And, there's the individual story, and then there's the collective stories. And, from my experience, they just tend to appear and they get handed down from generation to generation. And I kind of see the human experience as we're part of nature that's evolved to a level that has the capacity to transform these stories of, not enough, of fear, of dominance, division. And within our capacity to do that, we're transforming those stories. We're releasing that through processing that collective trauma on earth that play out in these stories. As we release that, we're bringing healing to ourselves as life on earth, and it kind of ripples out everywhere. So yeah, it plays out, but I like to think that it gets better. I like to think that it has improved over time, that brutality has overall lessened, as we have more of a sense of our basic needs met, of our survival in place, then we have, the opportunity to have conversations like this, the luxury and the privilege of that, which gives us the space to then address the more existential crisis of these stories.
Yeah, it just makes me wish that like countries could have like a healer. Like you could just have like as an entity, right? You could send the United States, or you could send Canada or the UK, whoever, you could just send them. They have like almost like they have a national, like Maya Angelou was the poet laureate for here in this country
That was
for a
beautiful.
minute.
Hmm.
And we could have like a shaman laureate, or whatever, someone who just like could collectively heal everybody. Would be that'd be a marvelous, marvelous thing to be able to have.
Yeah, well, and we can all do that in our own way. It's a delicate balance, right? Because there's kind of two parts of that. There's one, knowing that we are empowered to help, to spread light and to spread healing, and we all do that in our own way. You do that through your own work, through comedy, and through this app you're creating in different ways. When I work with people, something that we did in a recent class, we connected with the land that where each of them were from. And so, well, some of them were new there, they weren't from there, and some were really connected with their land. But we felt into those spaces and we felt, okay, where does it feel painful? Where is the energy blocked? How can we help it to flow? And how can we witness this intelligence, the intelligent flow of consciousness healing itself? Sometimes that's all it takes. It's just a witnessing. Like you mentioned earlier, that person screaming on the bus about not wearing a mask, needing a hug. It's like sometimes if we just breathe and hold space for that, they'll process it and move on. And it's kind of like that with anything. So with the land, with the people, we all have the power to bring healing to that. And when we come together to do that, it's magnified even more. And so we all have that inside of us. It's something um, that I used to feel powerless too. If I would go by something and I would see devastation or destruction, I would get upset and angry, and I put that out into the world. And now I know I can bring light to that, and that's something that helps.
Do you think this is? I mean, I do want to get into like we were talking about when we first started, messages from your guides, and I think maybe we're already covering some of that. Um, Seemingly it feels like it, but the stepping into deeper purpose and being able to like bring light into these situations can be difficult when we find ourselves kind of getting sucked into it. And um, many people believe the narrative that you can't make change without anger, and that anger is the way that things get changed, and that your voice will only be heard if you scream it, if you scream loud enough. to be heard over everybody else. So when it comes to like stepping into a deeper purpose for everyone, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I feel like it's moving away from that kind of narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I can ask my guides about this as well. I feel like, yeah, anger's obviously can be exceptional fuel if you learn how to harness it in a way that's healthy, but it can also burn you up and create all kinds of problems. Um, and it can also be fueled by a sense of there being something wrong. Whenever we make something wrong, we create suffering. And so part of the bringing healing to it is, that's how we kind of bring the healing from our inside, from ourself first, is coming to peace with where we're at now and not making it wrong, and seeing that there is a purpose in everything. Everything is being of service in some way because it's presenting itself here. And so how can we find that way that it's helping and work with that and kind of focus on that and start shifting into the solution instead of the wrongness of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And just to be clear, for people listening, in no way am I like insinuating that like a hypothetical situation, like maybe during the last World War, that you hear a lot of people like talk shit about like thoughts and prayers. I like that whole phrase, like thoughts and prayers doesn't change shit. You know what I mean? Like all so
Mhm.
like I'm not suggesting that you just send your thoughts and prayers to like Hitler. You know what I mean? Like back in the day, or something like
He
that. There's
probably
some
really needed a hug though.
yes, he of all
A
the people
lot
in
of hugs.
history, he's on that top 10 list for sure. And your painting is beautiful. Come here. You know, you could have heard that a lot more often. But and hatred is learned, and this is like the thing that I had to remember, like in my very brief stint as a public school teacher when I was like elementary aged kids, that these kids are just they're replicating behavior that's learned, right? And especially when some of the more hateful stuff came out between students, that was like you're just like I can't. There's just in no scenario is this acceptable behavior to talk to another person like this, right? And you're like a 9-year-old kid. How did you just say that to another kid, right? And you can't be mad at the kid as much as you realize, okay, this was obviously this kid has heard this language before and was almost directed in using it in that way. And like remembering that really disarms like the anger you might have in the moment. Like, I can't believe this little, I can't believe. But it's like we were talking about earlier, like the passing of the buck, it just always keeps getting passed down, right? From one to the next, from one to the next. And so even for, I'm not trying to, what, what is it called when you're trying to like defend somebody that doesn't deserve defending necessarily? I can't remember the phrase, but I'm not trying to like stand up for Hitler here, but obviously Hitler learned a lot of this hatred from somewhere, from
Exactly.
people around him, or somehow. Like no one just wakes up one day and is like, I don't like Jewish people.
Yeah.
I think they're the devil, or whatever. All the crazy, poisonous thoughts that he had. But I kind of got lost on this tangent. But there is, it definitely seems like it's whether it's sitting on the floor, deleting oatmeal from your life, or you know, trying to figure out how to like let a grudge go. That when we perceive that someone, because I liked what you said about when we decide, deciding something is wrong creates suffering. And so when we decide someone was wrong in the way they treated us, we are now suffering the consequences of being wronged. And so moving past that it can be very difficult for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of feel like, do you mind if I ask my guides about moving past being wronged and hate, and maybe where hate comes from.
Oh, that'd be fascinating.
Okay, because I feel like it's kind of when you were talking to that earlier, I kind of wondering, I was thinking too, like, where does all this stuff come from? You know, you said hate is a learned thing. Where did we ultimately learn that from? You know, if we're not born that way, where did that begin getting passed down? I'm kind of curious about that. So, do you mind if I tune in?
No, I do not mind at all.
Okay, so I'm just going to speak as my guide. I find it's an easier flow that way. So if I talk in a weird way, that's my guide.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, cool. One sec. Yes, hate is something that is unnatural to your own energetic frequency. It is a form of twisting, if you will. And it is a part of this world and an aspect of duality. For we would not know and understand entirely the aspect of love without a form of contrasting energy. And so you have chosen to create this in this world. And as well with the concept of right or wrong, they're two contrasting energies to define each other. And you come here to experience both the light and the dark without judgment, just an exploration of light and dark and everything in between. And so this is part of what we've created here in duality so we can have the vastness and depth of our experience of life. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, the idea, there's fairly famous phrases, or actually they're very extremely famous phrases, but you can't know love, you know, without heartbreak, or and all these other, like the dual, like it boils down to duality, I guess, is it's really the fascinating part about all of this. And it seems like a puzzle that every time I feel like I might be getting more pieces to this puzzle of duality and trying to understand all of its complications, and especially the liminal space in between, whenever I think I'm getting closer to the puzzle being completed, I zoom out and realize that, oh, I've only been working on a corner of the puzzle this whole time.
I think
Right?
that's the nature of it though, right? We zoom in and out and it's this cycle, and you can go through infinity into the macro or the macro level, micro or the macro level. It's kind of like this torus shape that kind of circles through itself. That's kind of the beauty of it. There's no end.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautifully maddening, and it's maddeningly beautiful, I guess, as well. We did talk about potentially wanting to get into some messages from your guides, and I think that was this is a good way to just kind of maybe have a continuation
Yeah.
from the message about hate. What were the specific things that they've been really letting you know to get out?
Yeah, well, as I've been connecting more with guides, this energy and experiences I've been feeling before I jump in and let them speak, that there's a lot happening on Earth right now. There's kind of a lot going down from what we can see and beyond that too. So there's a lot of kind of galactic and universal attention being paid to Earth at this time because we're going through a massive transition, and it's a very special thing that's happening here. It's kind of a birthing of a new consciousness. It's kind of an awakening, or maybe a reemergence of a consciousness. And it's kind of labor pains that we're going through right now, but there's a lot of energy connected to it. So why don't I just tune in with them and ask them about that and this, how we can move through the sense of division and hate. And if there's anything else you want to know, you can ask them.
Okay, great.
Okay, cool. Yes, in this time, you will feel an increasing sense of energy, and this can be channeled into increasing agitation and suffering, or increasing momentum into a flow, into a transition. And so, what we do with that energy at this time is our decision. And so, it is very important in these times to use the power of your awareness to focus it in the direction in which you want to move in. So, the more we think of any one thing or speak of any one thing, we are feeding energy into that. And so part of moving through that is allowing others to, and not needing them to be any different, but focusing on what brings you happiness and connecting with others who want to share in that energy. And as you connect with others in that way, it will create a container, it will magnify that focus of intention, and it will expand the energy around you into a frequency that is intent on moving into harmony versus division. And so realize that you are incredibly powerful. You always have been. And these times are calling you to bring a deeper awareness to this power that you have, and mastery and self-mastery in harnessing that power for what you wish to create instead of what you do not wish to create. Yeah.
I think that's a big one for so many of us, is the what we wish to create versus what we don't wish to create. Because when we spend so much time focusing on the things we don't want to happen, we are unwittingly calling those things in.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's letting go of the addiction to feeling angry or righteous or judging of others, and just allowing them to be on their path. And that kind of cuts the cord and the tie to what we don't want.
Yeah, and judging people is an addiction.
Oh yeah. The mind loves to judge. It judges like I went to an ecstatic dance one time, and the teacher had said, for tonight, just notice the judgments that you have. Just notice your mind when it judges and allow it to pass. And okay, cool. And so I was dancing, like it had been, I think, 30 seconds, and there must have been 100 judgments. Like, wow, I didn't realize the level that my mind judges thing by habit. It's just like it's the retraining of the mind into a different behavior. It's a practice.
Yeah, for sure. And I have friends who are really into the neuroscience of the brain and why we do things, and they'll tell you, "Oh, yeah, well, judgment is the biological imperative of the brain has to make judgments constantly to make sure you stay alive." Um, and so you're not going to stop yourself from you're never going to stop your brain from judging. And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about like uppercase judgment here as opposed to lowercase judgment. We're talking about like judging, you know this is a bad example, like judging someone based on what shirt they've decided to wear, or
Right.
how they style their hair or something like that, as opposed to judging what should I keep walking forward off of this cliff, or should I stop? Well, I've made the judgment to stop walking forward so I don't die. um,
As far as the
that is
mind
a
concerned, it's just doing its job in either case.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder if this energy, it makes me think of, someone has a canister of fuel. They can either use it to power like an old fan to cool everybody down, or they can pour it on the house to burn the house down, right? Um, when the guides are talking about all this energy, and it's our choice how to use it. And it's a higher level of energy seemingly happening right now. Was that correct?
It's an intensifying of energy.
Or an intensifying, yeah. And does this period, I'm curious if there's any way to know how long this period lasts of the intensification.
Right. That's up to us. It lasts as long as it needs to last. as we go into this time of transition, it's our choice and our capacity for moving through the shadows that have been swept under the rug for many centuries. And many of these shadows are being risen to the surface through many different movements and um, through people demanding change, and also people beginning to look inward in themselves. But this time of transition, it is relative because time is a rule of the physical world. um, and ultimately, everything's happening at once outside of the physical form. But while we are here, through our perception of it, it may seem endless or it may seem like an instant because we all move through that at our own pace. So instead of looking at the world being in one particular state, it's about looking at our awareness, our realization, because as we shift those inner worlds, we move into different dimensions within this physical plane. And as we do that, we gradually move the collective towards another dimension. And that can be a dimension of harmony or disharmony. But consciousness, life wants to move into harmony. Nature wants to be balanced. And with that, the birthing process, it can appear very violent and difficult before a new form of life comes into the world. And so how long that takes depends on each of us and how we respond to the environment that we're in.
It's fascinating to think that life wants to move into harmony. And many scientists will say that the law of entropy about the physical world dictates that the world moves towards chaos and breaking down or becoming disorganized. And I know there have been some scientific breakthroughs recently that hint at the possibility that entropy is actually not, the law of entropy might not be as firm as once believed when it comes to the laws of thermodynamics. But that is so it is interesting that from the spiritual side, it's like no, it wants to, it leans toward, tends toward moving into harmony as opposed to chaos and destruction.
Yeah, and destruction isn't necessarily chaos. So, it's the transitionary state. So when a mother is birthing a child, it appears to be chaos, but it's the moment just before this emergence of new life. And as something breaks down, we all have our time, our cycle of one form, and then that form returns to the earth and goes back into a recycling, and then is emerged as a new form, and that all feeds into itself. So it's really a very organized process, a really intelligent process that evolves into very powerful ecosystems over time. And so even what appears to be chaos, nature is organized quite well.
Yeah, I guess it's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
One's destruction is another birth. I mean, you're going to get different answers from the grape than you are from the raisin, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, the raisin's going to be like, "Isn't this beautiful? I'm being born." Meanwhile, the grape is like, I'm being sucked dry," over here. Um, yeah, that's interesting. The grape, for whatever reason, that the grape and the raisin, sits with me and makes me understand it a little better.
The broader
Um,
perspective. Yeah.
yeah. The well, let's wrap this up here for this time. We'll have to, revisit this conversation again in the future, hopefully, and have a continuation of this dialogue because it's been really fun. Is there any like last um, not final words, but something that you want to kind of wrap this up with today?
Um, I think that if people are feeling that sense of overwhelm, like there's a lot going on in the world, just know that you're not alone, that there is purpose to everything. And it's unique to everyone, but everything is serving some purpose. And life gives us exactly what we need as we need it. And we know that because it's what's here, it's what's happening. And I work with a lot of people in my mentor classes where they feel initially like something's calling them, like they can almost reach something, but they're not quite sure what it is or where or how to get it. But I just want people to know that if you're feeling called, it's for a reason. Something is calling you, and what you're looking for is looking for you too. And you can absolutely find it. And so that's my place in all of this. Is I empower the empaths and the intuitives and the healers to kind of awaken their gifts, because we need all hands on deck right now.
Yeah, for sure. And the more, I mean, it's a beautiful thing when you look at the landscape of the spirituality world. And I know New Age gets, has negative connotations for so many people, even spirituality, I suppose, to some people who are kind of curmudgeons about it all. But it's a beautiful thing to see the new faces always continually popping up, and the community grows larger, grows stronger. And just like any other community, there's problems within it, and et cetera, et cetera. But
Of course.
the uh, the fact that the community is exploding and growing in such a way is a positive sign. And the the future looks bright, I would say, for sure. And because more and more people are looking within themselves to be like, well, what does this all mean? What am I really doing here? What is my purpose? And how do I find it? So thank you for helping connect people to that. It's a really wonderful thing. And just as a reminder, people can go to mindbodyfree.com if you want to sign up for the mentorship program, correct?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And that's kind of the beauty of right now. It's an opportunity for people to realize it's like this is the pressure that kind of forges the diamond. It's that like the extra push to kind of, it doesn't, a lot of people I find are having a hard time doing things that don't feel fulfilling anymore. And it's coming to be a time where, life is sacred. Our time here is sacred. It's finite. Let's use it as best we can. And yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of
and
fun.
people can find the podcast of the same name, I believe, Mind Body Free, correct?
Yeah.
Everywhere is it everywhere podcasts are available?
Yeah, it's all over.
Apple, Google, Spotify, all that good
all the
stuff.
places.
So
yeah.
So make sure you check that out. I will be, by the time this goes up, I think probably be around the same time, or probably maybe even before. I was thanks for having me as a guest on your show
that was
recently.
fun.
So that should be out there as well. So Abigail, thank you so much for doing this. This was fun as always, very enlightening. The paranormal first aid kit, I had to write that down.
That's a great idea.
And thanks for the tips for people when it comes to protecting themselves, going on investigations. I think that's very helpful, and and it's very affordable. In fact, it's free. So you don't need to buy a bulletproof vest. You can just walk through the steps that we went through here today, and you'll be better protected when entering those kind of situations. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan.